c'est un plaisir d'animer notre prochain panel sur le développement et la mise en œuvre des applications concrètes d'IA générative dans le domaine financier. Nous avons vu que la technologie GenAI est en train de révolutionner les industries. En particulier, elle est tellement puissante qu'elle pourrait potentiellement aider à faire un fact-check d'éléments dans le débat ce soir. Mais en particulier, dans le secteur financier, on est vraiment uniquement positionné pour pouvoir bénéficier du potentiel de GenAI. In this panel, we're going to explore strategies essential for successfully developing and implementing GenAI applications, driving efficiency, effectiveness, and enhancing customer experience. First, we're going to talk about what are key steps in designing and deploying GenAI in the financial sector. Then we're going to talk about most promising use cases driving the highest value and providing the most competitive advantage. And third, we're going to talk about how financial institutions are overcoming challenges and risks in order to deploy GenAI solutions successfully in production. I'd love to welcome the panelists today. We have Antoine, Director of Financial Services at Databricks. Thank you for coming all the way from Phoenix, Antoine.
Thank you for having us.
Next, Yannick Lallement, VP and Chief AI Officer at Scotiabank. Yannick, I have to say, I admire the passion. Participating in 2 consecutive panels, bringing your wealth of experience and expertise.
I can never say no to you, Yara.
And Parinaz, Sobhani, Managing Director and Head of AI at Sagard. Congratulations on your new role, Parinaz.
Thank you.
All right, so kicking off with our first section on GenAI transformation journey. First question, Antoine, how do you see GenAI changing the way we operate in FS?
Yes, okay, so GenAI is completely transforming the way we work in financial services, but to answer that question, maybe we can take a step back and look at what is different now than it was a few years ago. I mean, we had AI, we had data science, we had machine learning, we had large language models or deep learning models for a long time. But I think what we didn't have was the business alignment. Many projects failed to get into production simply because we couldn't get the business user completely aligned to a technology strategy. And what happened lately is that business users now can relate to those technologies, can talk to those technologies, can interact, interface, integrate with those technologies, and that changes everything because suddenly, for the first time, we have technology and business side by side being completely aligned. So technology is no longer restricted just for technologists. People can start using that in their day-to-day job, can see for themselves how AI can affect their day-to-day jobs. And really that changes everything from a day-to-day process. So as a portfolio manager, maybe you'll spend much more time on driving new training strategies than you spend time reading documents and translating and summarizing corporate disclosures, as an example. As a claim adjuster, maybe you will spend more time today on fraud prevention, as GenAI is here to bring additional context behind all those different claims. So what happened is that full democratization of data and AI, and you shouldn't be restricted to only asking a technologist anytime you have a question. No, we can bring AI and GenAI and data directly to the lines of businesses.
Thank you, Antoine, for that insight around how business and technology are coming together in order to enable broader access.
Yeah.
My next question is, how is Databricks supporting your industry partners in FS along this journey?
Yes, absolutely. So Databricks is a data platform, right? We've been started our journey as the idea to unify data and analytics, having the data scientist and the data engineer on the same platform. Then as technology evolved, we've seen that we could cater for the data analyst side of the house. So having through the concept and the architecture called the lakehouse, having all the different data personas. But we didn't have necessarily the business users. And now this is what GenAI brings, is bring the business users part of that data strategy. First-class citizen of a data platform, and not having to rely on an army of BI analysts to create the right view, the right dashboard, the right tables for you to interact with those applications. So Databricks brings the power of generative AI in a data and AI platform for you to start effectively connecting the dots all the way from the data ingestion to the curation, to the data science, to the experiments, to surfacing those insights to the business users.
Thank you, Antoine. And we've seen in the industry a lot more focus now on making enterprise-wise technology choice for Gen AI. It's not anymore done in silos in the business functions.
Yeah.
Very interesting insight. Yannick, how will Gen AI change the way the banking sector operates?
So Gen AI, but not only Gen AI, AI in general, apparently is going to disrupt financial services more than many other industries. That's according to a StatScan study that came out a few days ago. And so, as individuals working in the financial industry, we have to be ready for that. Effectively, I think that means we have to embrace AI and Gen AI, right? And as I mentioned earlier, that's what we are doing at Scotiabank. We are rolling out widely employee productivity tools like GitHub Copilot and Microsoft Copilot 365. Our employees are telling us that this is useful to them, and I am a user personally. I believe it is the case. We are also looking at custom tools for specific groups of employees. An example, of course, is RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, allowing specific groups of employees to ask questions in English from their documentation. That's a bit of a game changer because right now, each group of employees can, of course, look up their documentation in a search engine if they don't know how to do something. But even if the search engine gives you the exact best document in the first position, you still have to open it, read through it, and then find the answer to your question. So there's quite a bit of effort needed when someone needs to refer to the documentation. With Gen AI, you can, of course, allow employees to ask questions the way they want to ask it. And you will ground the answer. You will use an LLM to answer based on the documents you have in your corpus. Of course, there's concerns around inaccuracies and so on, but those can be managed. You can build a system that is effectively very accurate at the expense of sometimes saying, sorry, I don't know, even though it should know. But things like that, for example, are a bit of a game changer because we have lots of frontline groups of employees, right, in branches, in contact center. Those groups tend to have a bit of turnover, so we have newcomers literally every day. They don't always know everything from scratch, of course. And this type of tool is really useful to help them find a solution to their questions. In fact, we made a video where we show how long it takes and what is the process to follow when you want an answer, to use the search engine, click through, open the document, read through, versus ask the question and get the answer from the Gen AI. And no surprise, it is much faster to get the answer from the Gen AI directly. So we are doing that with employees for now, because employees can be trained to, if the answer you're getting is not exactly what you expected, then maybe double check. Although, again, the system we built is generally very accurate. And if the system chooses not to give you an answer, which happens once in a while, the employee can always revert back to the old solution, right? That's a bit more complicated to do, for example, with customers. It's hard to tell a customer, sorry, I don't know, go back to the search engine. So that's why we have really focused very heavily on the employee side for now. Again, it's changing. We are looking more and more at customer facing, but that journey is going to be very deliberate and very careful and very risk aware.
Makes sense to have a staggered approach towards adoption. Thank you, Yannick, for sharing Scotiabank's Gen AI journey with us. Parinaz, switching from the banking sector to fintech, what are some of the Gen AI transformation journeys that you see in the fintech or broader asset management world?
So I just started, and I'm not very deep in fintech, so I will share a little bit of insight about the broader Gen AI adoption across industries, not only for financial industry. And I've been around for a few hype cycles, and I'm going to tell you, the patterns are very similar. Every single time we had the wrong expectations from these technologies. And I guess for many of us who've been around, and Shelby also shared a little bit of her experience, it's been the same. Like now again, we are throwing every single problem to LLMs and we're expecting it to do the magic. When I started 7 years ago at my previous role, the first few weeks, I was just walking around and I was telling everyone, I'm not a magician. I'm not a magician. If you have data problems, I can't overnight solve those problems. I can't solve every single problem out there because at the end of the day, we have those mathematical optimization techniques. And it's the same with LLMs. It's not a magic. It's exactly the same, optimization. So we again have the wrong expectations. We again are thinking about solving the wrong problems. And we again don't have the patience to build the right infrastructure. I spoke about like why I'm a little bit scared this time around again, but I'm also very excited because I think with LLMs, my PhD was focused on natural language understanding. At that time, I thought that natural language understanding is the hardest problem for AI to solve. And I was surprised when we made so much progress over the past 5-6 years. And I'm very excited because we are finally speaking the same language. What does it mean? It means that, like, for example, you had all these data analysts in your organizations, and you had to train them how to get access, how to write those complicated or complex SQL queries. Now, even a business leader can write a plain language, plain English text, and it's going to read LLMs. You can translate them to those complicated, complex SQL queries and get access to data. Of course, there are some guardrails. Of course, they might make errors. But at the end of the day, it made it much more accessible. It's similar to even executing a piece of code. We talked about the agents in the previous panel. Again, all of us have been using ChatGPT and for search, for like simplifying a concept, or organizations like Scotia or other organizations that I worked with, they started to use all these RAG systems. But beyond that, we can actually expect LLMs to do things. What does it mean? It means they can execute on the piece of code. It can be iterative. They can share the result back with the humans, improve it, get some instructions, plan for it, make it like iterative, hierarchical. So there are so many amazing, I guess, progress that is happening. But at the end of the day, I also see still the wrong expectations. And I kept telling people, we have to go to the basics, back to the basics. This year was back to the basics for many of us, the practitioners in the industry, because product management 101s, change management 101s, data management 101s. So we were like, okay, yes, we are back to the basics because there is no magic, unfortunately. I have the bad news, there is no magic.
Well, thank you, Parinaz, for sharing the importance of data and technology feasibility. I know, Yannick, you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I really liked your point on there's no magic. And one of the concerns, not exactly concerns, but one of the problems I have at Scotia is that, and I'm sure everybody in the room who practices AI has the same problem. A lot of times people come to me saying, why don't we use AI to solve this, right? And I don't want to say most of the time, but fairly often it's one of two scenarios. Either you don't really need AI, you need business rules to solve this. It's not an AI use case. You can program your way out of it. You don't need AI, and if you don't need AI, you definitely should not use AI. AI is a lot more complicated than traditional software. Sometimes it's the other way, right? Sometimes it's something that AI cannot solve. It's beyond the reach of the current models. It's too complicated for AI. And so finding the sweet spot here, what practical business problems are exactly in what AI can do, and that you need AI for, that's one of the difficult conversations that we have in financial industries. That's
a fantastic point, and I'm happy to no longer have to use reinforcement learning for everything, but now it's the turn of Gen AI. And reinforcement learning is a multi-step optimization framework to solve problems that everyone was very excited about before Gen AI took the stage. So summarizing what we've heard here, it sounds like the best way forward in terms of Gen AI adoption is to think about 4 key pillars across business, data and technology, people, and risk. Making sure we identify the business problems with the highest return on investment that are the most relevant for the business, and then making sure we take into account the data and technology readiness and the feasibility of the use case, leveraging all that technology vendors have to offer in terms of capabilities, and then making sure we train our people to use Gen AI. None of us here went to universities and studied Gen AI. It's new to all of us. So we all are in this ramp-up journey to learn about Gen AI and about the risks that Yannick highlighted, including hallucination. How do we make sure that we train and set up the right boundaries around our Gen AI models? So very exciting journey in terms of adoption. Now, getting a little bit more nitty-gritty and tactical, we're going to talk about the use cases and benefits that we are seeing. Starting with Antoine. Antoine, what are some of the highest adoption rates in FS for particular use cases?
Before that, I just wanted to get back to the there's no magic. I agree, absolutely, there is no magic. There is a little bit of magic, though, when it comes to bringing Gen AI capabilities on top of a governance framework. Because every code out there can generate code. That's great. Any LLM can generate code. But no LLM will be able to fully understand your data estate, your acronym, the vocabulary, the way your different tables are structured, but a Gen AI that understands your governance. And I just wanted that parenthesis because I find that really ironic that the one thing we disliked the most in the past, data governance, turns out to be the key to the magic out there. Sorry, coming back to the use cases. I think if we survey thousands of organizations, everyone will come up with that same top one use case around Gen AI for customer contact center, call center, and for all the right reasons. Right. But we all realized, to Yannick's point before, that maybe having a customer-facing chatbot application is not necessarily the right way to go in financial services at first. And so many organizations started to move to the left, to more the middle office, the back office of all those contact call center use cases. Thinking in terms of automation, optimization, IVR, and also, frankly, as an end user, if I'm having a car accident today, touch wood, I don't want to call my insurance and talk to a bot. I want to talk to a human, right? So we realized the need to move Gen AI application more to the left, to the middle office. And these are the exact playground where Gen AI thrives today. Because the middle office was built because of the inefficiencies from the front office to the back office, because of those myriads of different processes and tables and risk management and fraud prevention and regulatory reporting. All of those use cases are becoming a fantastic place where Gen AI is being adopted today in financial services. My best example is regulatory reporting. There's nothing better than Gen AI to be able to understand the complexity of all the different rules we have to comply with, to go through the thousands of documents and chapters and paragraphs. So that becomes practical and pragmatic use of Gen AI that directly impact the bottom line of an organization.
Thank you, Antoine, for shedding light on top use cases around call center analytics, regulatory alignment, etc. Would you be able to also share insight on costs, time to see the benefits and returns from such use cases?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's about having the right strategy to start small, to select the right model, delivering value right away. I mean, nobody is interested in the long-term benefit that maybe in 1 year time after we train that full LLM that we're going to get that ROI. So there are some utility capabilities that we can bring in right away, like summarization, extracting insights from those documents, translation, code generation, but as part of a much more wider strategy. Concrete example, claim processing. I love claim processing because of the complexity of processing all those different claims. Gen AI can be used to split that problem and break that problem down into specific tasks. Each of those tasks could be using Gen AI on the back end. So extracting context from a car accident image, from reading policy data and understanding how much of that coverage, how much of that accident could be covered by those different policies. All of those could be individual tasks that solve the business problem, that drives business value, but are part of a wider story of claim automation, straight-through processing. So this is really how we're seeing that massive adoption, is thinking practically and pragmatically in a small steps as part of a wider transformation.
That's fantastic, I think, in terms of highlighting the importance of prioritization of use cases and also the potential for scalability, et cetera, before or as we build the use cases roadmap for an institution. Yannick, from your side, what are the most prominent GenAI use cases Scotiabank has underway? I know you spoke to some of them earlier on, but happy to hear a bit more about a few examples of significant value add.
So I mentioned the personal productivity for employees. That's almost table stakes now. I talked about the custom tools for specific groups of employees that is starting to bring value. One more family of use cases have to do with backend process automation. And I can give two examples. One is integrated with our customer-facing chatbot. We have a chatbot that is not GenAI powered. We use AI, of course, to identify the intent of the customer, but anything the chatbot says has been written by a Scotiabank content developer. And so the chatbot effectively cannot hallucinate because it is not in control of what it says. The bank is in control of what it says. This chatbot is able to answer roughly 50% of the sessions that come to it. So each time a customer asks a question, 50% of the time they will get the answer within the chatbot. The other 50% of the time, the chatbot will hand over that customer to a live chat agent. So our customer can continue chatting on their mobile phone. They don't have to call. There is no disruption. It's just a single chat. They just get handed over to a live agent. So what we used to do before GenAI is the live agent would receive a transcript of what has happened so far between the customer and the chatbot, so that, of course, the agent can pick up the conversation where the chatbot left it off, right? It's not a great experience for the customer to start from scratch, of course, when they have already described their problem and been told they need to speak to someone to solve it. So the agent would read the transcript and then pick up from there. Now, of course, we use GenAI as a backend process. Nobody sees it. Nobody speaks to it. It's just completely behind the scenes. The GenAI summarizes that transcript, which is frankly not very pleasant to read, into a summary that has been structured based on what the agents need to pick up the conversation. So, for example, the summary will say, it will be a summary in English text. It will also have any transaction that was mentioned. It will also have any product that was mentioned. And that makes it much faster for the agents to pick up the conversation with the customer. So that's really the best case scenario. It's a benefit for the bank. We spend less time servicing any given chat. It's a benefit for customers because they don't have to wait at the handover time. That's a good example of where GenAI is fairly easily saving time for everybody. This is also a very, very good use for GenAI because this is really the core business of GenAI, summarizing stuff. So it's going to be very good at it. On top of that, if it hallucinates a problem that the customer didn't have, we haven't seen that occur, but in theory it's possible. If it hallucinates something, then it will be clarified and the stakes are fairly low there. Another example I can give, if I have time, is something completely different. Antoine, you mentioned compliance and regulatory. As part of our obligations, we maintain a database of operational incidents that occur throughout the bank. And that database, of course, has structured fields, right? Which business line, which employees were concerned, and so on. But importantly, it has a large text description, what actually happened. And this is hard to ask anyone entering data in this database to put that in a structured way. But again, that is something that GenAI can do, right? So we use GenAI to analyze all of those text descriptions that are entered in the operational risk database, effectively, and extract the interesting data point, really to convert unstructured text description into structured data, which would be very difficult for someone to do upfront.
These are very exciting use cases. I can see how much downstream impact, for example, call center analytics can have, whether it's collections or customer support, etc. So really like a central capability that then can have across business functions support agents and employees. Very
I can
nice.
add one more example that might also impact the customer experience. Financial crimes. I guess many institutes are dealing with financial crimes, anti-money laundering, fraud detection, and I don't know how deep you know how it actually works, but it's all about like you have to process a bunch of unstructured documents, most of the time images of like some documents, which involves also OCRs, and then most of the previous technologies was about simple pattern matching. So like you would look for this family name or like a name or certain, I guess, keywords in those documents. But of course, there is always a missing context when you have a simple pattern matching. With LLMs, we have capabilities and we are much better at understanding the context and reading multiple documents, understanding the context. So one of the biggest problems in the financial crimes is false positive rates. I have seen some examples of using LLMs and reducing the false positive rates that can immediately impact your customer experience because you don't want your customers to be impacted by a false positive. So that's another example I wanted to share with the group. And going back to your point around magic, let's speculate. I think it's very important as we are developing our strategies again, to go back and have some sort of retrospective on what was the reasons behind the failures of some of our AI strategies before. And I promise you that you're going to see the patterns coming again. Of course, like we have a more powerful technologies, and of course we have much more like rich ecosystem, like tools, open source. But at the same time, for example, you mentioned some of the reasons, like the misalignment between the business objectives and the actual technologies or what we have built. Misalignments between the actual customer requirements and what we have built, because in silos, we took our data scientists to a room, we threw them all the data we have and told them, okay, tell us what you can do for us. And they have no idea about your customers, they have no idea about the regulation, they have no idea about what they are optimizing for or some of your business objectives, and that's why, that's another reason. But one of the other reasons that I believe it's very common to this new wave of technology adoption is change management. All your customers are now reading about AI and AGI, and like the fear around AI is like huge. And we know for any technology adoption, again, back to the basics, you need trust. You need trust between the end users and these technologies. So then there is definitely, even for your own, you said internally, most of you are de-risking these technologies adoption by first internally, I guess, launching these products. But even internally, all your employees have heard about AI is taking over our jobs. How can you trust a technology that you believe is going to take over your job? So that's why, again, change management is very, very important. It's not technology. It's not about like understanding the nuts and bolts of the technology, what is happening in the deep learning. It's about the fear. It's about the human being. It's about the emotions of the human being. And it's about how you can really help those employees to understand, for example, it's about the augmentation. How can help them to understand how it can help them with their performance. So again, like some of these basics that, again, for many, like you, most of you have been around longer than me, and you know the basics, but again, sometimes we forget some of these basics, and we start, like, we're getting so excited about this new technology, and we believe the magic going to happen overnight.
Fantastic. Thank you, Parinaz, for highlighting the key strategies to help reap the benefits of Gen AI. And synthesizing what we've heard in this segment of the panel, we've heard that some of the most prominent use cases include knowledge management, call center analytics, alignment with regulations, data extraction and structuring, and I can speak to some of the reporting automation that a lot of banks have been adopting to be able to comply with new regulations. For example, E23 regulations that require that all models be documented, and there you can accomplish pretty impressive automation levels of the likes of 80% in order to accelerate manual work and really spend employee time on more strategic tasks. So thank you all for the contributions here. We would be remiss if we don't speak to the rise in bad actors and usage of Gen AI. Et ici, je ne parle pas de quand nos enfants utilisent Gen AI pour faire leurs devoirs de rédaction. I'm speaking more to when it is used to increase fraud, increase money laundering, etc. So not only do we need to make sure that we're paving the way to adopt Gen AI, we also need to make sure we have the appropriate defense for detractors using Gen AI at the detriment of our customers and of our society. And here, it's a perfect segue to talk about challenges and solution approach when it comes to difficulties in the adoption journey. So starting with Antoine, what are the main challenges around adoption you see in the market? And can you elaborate on the controls and content mediation that Databricks offers when it comes to large language models?
Yes, absolutely. So there is obviously the security aspect of Gen AI. There is also the compliance aspect. I like that you mentioned fin crime, so AML, KYC. It's a good example where Gen AI can make a massive difference, but at the same time, we have those models that we need to comply with by regulation and need to be able to fully explain the output of that model, which is not necessarily an easy task when a model is made out of 405 billion parameters. So how do we start bringing a model governance framework and that concept of model transparency, of understanding what data was used to train what model at what given point in time, to be able to replay all of those, even though we may not necessarily fully explain the model per se, we can fully explain the approach, the context that we've taken to take those decisions. That's a shameless plug for a solution that we've built with EY and Databricks about model risk management in a world of Gen AI. So that's one aspect, which is that more compliance in a world where models become less and less explainable. I think from a security standpoint, I was shocked to see that when OpenAI was released in the market the first day, I was thinking every single bank will block that access right away. Like, we don't want IP to be sent and just someone copying and pasting that on an external interface. It took some time to get banks finally realizing that that was a potential security threat. And so we've seen a much more pragmatic use of still using proprietary technologies like OpenAI, but funneling and gateway all of those calls in a safe and secure manner so that not everyone will be calling those interfaces with their API keys and everything, but centralizing that as a group. But also understanding that there are lots of techniques where we may not necessarily need to rely on a proprietary model out there. We may bring an open source model and bring that in our data estates, where our data is. We may decide to bring a Llama v3 model and fine-tune that to fully understand our data, all the way to pre-training our own model that is probably much smaller in size, but much more specific to solve specific tasks without having to rely on an external connection. So I think the strategy when it comes to security is being able to acknowledge that there is multiple approaches. There are multiple approaches you could use. And depending on the use case, depending on the risk, depending on the benefit, depending on the complexity and the cost as well, to be able to use all of those different strategies in a cohesive manner. So we mentioned RAG. That's also another way, security aside, to minimize the hallucination of a model and being able to dictate that model. You can answer only within the specific context I bring you and not just make things up. So this is also a good way to minimize the hallucination. And there are obviously all the guardrail that you can build or that you can leverage from Databricks, where we have our R&D team to safeguard a model from offensive language or different capabilities that you would like absolutely to remove from any of regulated industry large language models.
I think, Antoine, as you said, 80% of top executives are concerned about AI risks. You mentioned privacy and security that are top of mind. Others include reliability, accountability, transparency, bias and fairness. So a lot of considerations to account for as we build Gen AI models, but also a lot of opportunity to overcome historical biases, to make sure we make sound strategic decisions, and so on. Yannick, from your perspective, can you speak to key challenges arising from Gen AI activation across tech, people, and risks, and perhaps share a bit of perspective on how Scotiabank is addressing them?
I think the main the main risk for GenAI is really that of inaccuracies. We've discussed it a few times. That is starting to get under control. There's multiple techniques, RAG being one of them, that help make sure that inaccuracies don't occur too often. The way we address that is, again, by focusing on employee first. If you focus on employee first, you are really de-risking your GenAI approach by, I don't know, a factor of 10x at least. So employee first is the number one thing. Understanding the consequences of a mistake, right? If the GenAI hallucinates something, what happens next? That has to be laid out clearly. And having the right process to follow to make sure all the guidelines and all the controls are in place. There's one more risk that people don't necessarily think about. It's, again, that going back to that magic theme. There is a little bit of magic, I agree with that, but it sounds like a lot of magic. And it's the first time that we humans can speak to something that is not a human. At the same time, we have also lost the monopoly on writing, right? Something else than us can write now. And so we tend to ascribe to those things, the GenAIs, the chatbots, qualities that are that of humans, but they don't have those qualities. And so, or they don't have all those qualities. And so the risk here is understanding what you can do with the GenAI and what you should not do with the GenAI. And back to that BCG and Harvard study, they actually realized that some of the tasks were better, more productive, higher quality output when using GenAI, but another group of tasks actually resulted in lower quality results. And that's because the one group of tasks is well adapted to GenAI, the other is not. So to give you an example, the first group of tasks would be things like creating marketing messages, that's very good for GenAI. On the group of tasks that don't work so well with GenAI, generating business plans. It will happily generate you very confidently a business plan, but concretely speaking, that business plan will be useless for you because it doesn't know your context and so on. So the risk here is understanding what you should do and understanding what you should not do with the GenAI. And you control that through education, right? There's no other way.
About to say education.
An experience, right? As people use it more, they start realizing what works well, what doesn't work well. So summarization, almost perfect. Generating business plans, completely useless.
This really highlights the importance of human in the loop, realizing that GenAI can help augment capabilities, at the moment at least, without having it directly interact with a customer to reduce the risks. Parinaz, from your perspective, what are some of the challenges slowing down GenAI and more broadly AI adoption?
We talk about hallucination. I just want to point out that actually it's one of the superpowers of LLMs. When you ask ChatGPT, how can I surprise my husband for his birthday, every time it gets creative and gives you a new idea. Imagine it would just give you the same idea, then it would be so boring. So that's superpower. That's the superpower of LLMs, that they can actually go beyond the input that they have been trained on and actually create new materials or content. But back to all your points is about using them for the right problems or putting the guardrails around them or integrate them with their own data and having multiple steps of processing the output they generate. Mm-hmm. So and then again, like the other point that I keep hearing that these models are black box and that's why they are so scary. For your information, these models are not black box, but we have a cognitive limitation as humans, and we can't understand several layers of nonlinear transformation. So there is no black box, but there is a cognitive limitation of human beings. So we don't understand the mathematical optimization, but there is no black box. If we had a different cognitive system, we could have understood them. But of course, now with our current regulation, we need to explain the output of these models. We need to explain like how these models work, and that's why I guess like, this is one of the challenges that we keep talking about explainability. But I totally agree that these models, they can definitely perpetuate all the biases existing in our human history. There is no way, again, because data is the main ingredients, back to the basics. And So bias is one of the huge problems, I guess. The other problem is, I think we should talk about environmental problems as well. These models need GPUs. GPUs are very computationally heavy, and I guess we have to talk about some of those environmental challenges with these models, and that's why there is a huge effort around making these models more compact, making these models smaller, and also reusing. For example, you don't need to really train your own LLM. You can just use one of the existing open source LLMs and just fine-tune it, use it like hundreds of data points. And it's not going to be as computationally expensive, and it's not going to be as costly for your business.
And it will be yours.
Exactly.
So to understand like specific business use cases that you want to address, absolutely. I agree.
Exactly.
And the cost alongside the environmental impact, so yeah, it's the same. There are multiple approaches that you could use instead of relying on the quote-unquote best-in-class model that is today. So first, it will be different tomorrow, but also it may not necessarily be fit for purpose for that small task that you're trying to address. Sorry to interrupt.
No, and my last point is around the way I think about this technology adoption going forward is about, it's going to be at the end of the day a routing system or operating system. It's going to have different components. Some of these components, as you mentioned, not necessarily AI. They might be just simple business rules because they might be sufficient. Some of these components requires language understanding because they are interacting with humans and they're getting instructions from humans. Some of these components needs to actually, those agents that they have to go search something on the web. For example, all your market research teams, like they have to have access actually to the web. Like some of you are thinking about those LLMs and agents, they shouldn't have access to the web, of course, because of all the risks. But at the end of the day, you're going to understand over time for some of those applications, you actually need access to the most recent web data. Even these LLMs, because we can't retrain these LLMs every day, every night. So we have to always have access to the most recent web data. And some of these going to be more agents that they can execute on the code. And at the end of the day, for every request coming to this operating system, there should be an intelligent system that's going to figure out where to send this request to, where to send this query to. And I guess the organizations that are thinking about this operating system as the way of running their business going forward, I think they're going to be the winners of the future. Because at the end of the day, that's going to be the future of running any organization.
Thank you, Parinaz. I think highlighting sustainability risk is a key component here, given the carbon footprint that large language models have. And as Antoine mentioned, if we can use good old natural language processing with the same performance, then perhaps that's a reasonable choice in terms of governance and carbon footprint. Summarizing the segment of our discussion, we talked about various risks and how to mitigate them, including hallucination, for example, how to mitigate it with retrieval augmented generation. That is an approach that provides a model more context. Or we talked about privacy and security risks. And here a lot of the access controls, service level agreements with the technology vendors, and policies are key elements. We talked about how to approach those risks from a people perspective, so providing training, providing guidance to employees that may not have a technical background in order to better understand what are the controls in place and how to leverage them. Antoine mentioned there were several bans at the beginning, some at the country level, some at the firm level, because we weren't experienced with the technology and there were lots of mishaps. But same as cloud was there to stay, Gen AI is here to stay. It's more a matter of how we adopt it rather than if we adopt it. Now, with all these risks, we've seen emerging regulations across the globe. In Canada, we have, in the banking sector and for pension funds, insurance companies, we have E23 regulations coming up. We've seen the draft and the final updates are coming up over the next year. This will really govern AI models, asking that we include them in the model inventory, asking that we document them, that we vet them, and so on, with the appropriate level of scrutiny commensurable with risk. More globally, we've seen the EU AI Act, we've seen the NIST framework in the US, and in Canada, we have built C27 AI Data Act coming up as well. So a lot of incentive to make sure we govern our AI use well in order to foster value creation and to align with regulatory requirements and make sure we mitigate any business risks. With that, I'll go back to a theme that's been, that's been present since the morning today around collaboration, like the governor from New Jersey highlighted, really bringing together the industry of financial services with technology vendors, with academia, to be able to make sure we overcome all these new challenges that have emerged with Gen AI. How do we overcome Gen AI toxicity? How do we overcome Gen AI bias? These are all open research problems, and we're all collaborating as one to be able to answer these questions in a community. So very exciting journey ahead. We have to onboard cautiously, call to action. And with that, we'll conclude our panel for this panel session for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.